All right, so let's start learning about loops in JavaScript. The whole point of looping is to repeat some functionality. So instead of having to have, the same thing happen 10 times in a row by writing it 10 times, we can instead, it's not really automating it, but we can instead repeat it using a loop. So a loop is simply a way of repeating some functionality, and that can be something simple. Print the word hello 10 times. Instead of having to copy and paste console.log hello 10 times myself, I could use a loop. Or I could sum every number in an array, and that might be 2 numbers, but that could be 10,000 numbers. And if I didn't use a loop, that would be a lot of work. So there are multiple types of loops: for loops and while loops, for of loops, for in loops. We will see them in this section or in this unit. Here's another example of where loops are used. This is Reddit, once again, the backyard chicken subreddit. This is a cute photo. Some person just had 3 silky chickens. These fluffy white chickens just show up in their coop one day. They don't know how they got them. Anyway, there's a bunch of comments, probably a couple hundred different comments here, and they're stored in an array somewhere. And then each comment needs to be displayed as we can see it here. The title, or rather the username is posted, the number of points, how many days ago, the actual comment text. All of that stuff has to be displayed, and we don't know how to do that yet, but we will. But anyway, imagine it takes 5 lines of code for one comment, just to display it. Well, then we have hundreds of comments. Does that mean that there's 500 or 1,000 or 10,000 lines of code just to display this stuff? No. Instead, we don't do this, but the developers at Reddit use a loop where they can do something like, for every single comment in the array of comments, do these 5 lines. And that drastically shortens the amount of code that has to be written. So we'll get our first taste of loops in this video. We're going to talk about the for loop. And I need to warn you a tiny bit that the syntax for loops, if you're brand new to this and you've never heard of a for loop, might be a little intimidating. So buckle up, not because it's hard, but it's just a little bit unintuitive at first. This is the technical for loop syntax, the pattern for every for loop we write. Now, this probably looks like nothing meaningful to you, so let me show you an example. This right here is a for loop. This for loop is going to print all of the numbers from 1 to 10. So I've got a script over here, new app.js, new index. There's nothing to look at, just an empty page. And I'm going to go into my app.js and do a console.log 1. And then I'll fast forward through this, but I'll have 10 numbers here. So 2, 3, and so on. Okay, so silly, but I'm printing the numbers from 1 to 10. And that takes 10 lines. Now, if I had, I want to print 100 numbers or 1,000 numbers, it's going to scale with that number that I'm trying to print. If I'm trying to print 10,000 different numbers, that means 10,000 console.logs. Let's just take a look at this, though, refresh it. Okay, 1 to 10. Now, if I want to do this using a loop, I can rewrite the whole thing in 2 or 3 lines. And that's exactly what this for loop does. So I'm just going to write it out first, and then we'll go over each piece. So I'm going to comment this out so we just have a record of that. For, and then for let I equal 1, I less than or equal to 10, I plus plus, console.log I, with my parentheses. Okay, so let's see if it works. I'll refresh, and it looks exactly the same. The main difference now is that, can you see this over here? It says line 13 from app.js. All of these are coming from line 13, which is right there. Whereas before, they were coming from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, because each one of them is on a separate line, each console.log. All right, so let's take a look at the syntax here. How does this work? Well, what I'm doing is making a new variable for this loop. I'm calling it I. It can be named whatever I want, but it's really, really common to use I in a for loop because this variable doesn't really do anything anywhere else in our code. It exists for the purpose of this loop, and that's it. So I think it stands for index originally, but I'm not even sure if that's true. It's just a little counter variable. It doesn't really mean a lot. It's just going to be a number. So in this case, I started off at 1. All right, and our loop runs, and it console.logs 1. So that's what we see. If I refresh, we get 1. Now, we have these 2 other pieces, separated by semicolons. This middle part is a Boolean expression, and as long as this evaluates to true, the loop will continue running. So I is 1. Is 1 less than or equal to 10? Yes, it is, so we're still looping. And then the third piece here is called the increment expression. This is where we update the value of I. So I begins at 1. Is that less than 10? Yes. We add 1 to I, so now it's 2. Is that less than or equal to 10? Yes, it is. So now we add 1 more. We go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We get to 10. I is 10. Is that less than or equal to 10? Yes, it's equal. So we console.log 10, and then we add 1 to I. It's now 11. And then this is run again, and it returns false, and our loop finishes running. So these 3 pieces are always there. We come up with some variable, often called I, but again, you can name it whatever you want. Just be consistent. If you name this, num, then you need to write num less than or equal to 10 and num plus plus. Console.log num. That's all fine. You just need to be consistent. So we have this variable. It starts at 1. While we are less than or equal to 10, while num is smaller or equal to 10, do this. And after each iteration, add 1, num plus plus. We could also do num plus equals 1, right? Same thing. So like I said, this can take a little bit of time to get used to or to get comfortable with, but it's a really, really common idea in JavaScript. So 3 pieces, create a variable, do something to that variable after every loop while something is true. So separate them by semicolons, and then whatever code I put in here, I could put something else like console.log, I'm in the loop body. Whatever code is in there will run each time my loop executes. So this is where I could do something like, display Reddit comment, and then have that happen 10 times or 1,000 times or 100 times. I don't know why I did it 1,000 then 100. I meant to say 100,000. So that's what we could do inside of a loop. We could repeat that very lengthy thing that might be 10 lines of code or 100 lines of code. We're doing something very simple right now. We're just repeating 2 lines of code that are kind of useless. But this idea of a loop comes up over and over again. You might say over and over and over and over and over and over and over, like a loop. Okay, so we'll get more practice with for loops in the next video.